Shalom, my name is Adam Wasser from Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York. On the idea of modern technology, science, and archaeology, I like to compare and contrast, is the Bible true? Is it something that came from God, or is it something that came from man? Is science right in the idea that the idea of creation, of Genesis, is false? When I look at science and I look at modern archaeology, I find that there are bits and pieces that they take away, and they only choose which they want to investigate and which ones they like to discuss, but they don't go into the details of the Bible, of Genesis specifically. For example, with the parting of the Red Sea by Moses, well, it wasn't a Red Sea, it was a sea of reeds, the Yam HaSuf. So they'll look for and say, well, we got to find the Red Sea and we got to figure out how we can part the Red Sea. Well, it's false because it wasn't the Red Sea. It was a sea of reeds, something of low water. But I like to begin with Genesis, and I like to take a holy book called the Zohar, written about 2,000 years ago in Israel. And it says in the Zohar that God had an idea. He thought about the idea, and then he spoke it. And when God spoke the idea of creation, it came out as Hebrew letters. And the 10 attributes of God, the Sfirot, took these letters and combined them into beings, of people, of you, me, of trees and plants and animals. And when you look at how we speak as human beings, subconsciously, we don't realize it, but yes, we do have an idea in our head. We think about that idea and then we speak it. And through our own understanding of speech, we're able to combine those letters that come out of our mouth into words. So on many levels, the way God created the world is the way we think in our minds. And the 10 attributes of God are in many ways attributes of people. But God does say he created man in his image. Now, it says in Genesis that God created land. And this land was surrounded by the oceans. By one ocean, actually. And it's funny because science recently, in the last less than 100 years from now, said we had Pangea. We had one continent surrounded by oceans. But the Torah was saying this 2,000 years ago. But science will not pay attention to that. They pay attention to the 6 days of creation. There's something called Jewish science. A yeshiva in Torah, it's called Torah, in the old city of Jerusalem. I went there for a semester, and I took up Jewish science. And I learned there that the 6 days of creation were actually millions of billions of years, and not actually literally 6 days. Now, how do we come up with this idea? In the Bible it says 6 days, and now we're saying, well, those 6 days were millions of years. Well, first of all, God says that one day to you is like 1,000 years to me. Like, there is no time when it comes to God. God is on a total different time length than we are. So when God says 6 days, well, what does that mean? Another point that we can grab from this idea, this concept, is that the Jewish calendar is 5771. But that calendar started the day Adam and Eve were created. The 5 days before Adam was the 6th day, right? So those 5 days before are not counted in the Jewish calendar. Why? Because man needs a calendar. God does not need a calendar. So the calendar was created for man. So these first days before man was created are not represented in our understanding of time and space. Another point from Albert Einstein and his idea of relativity, that the sun is off by a minute to the Earth. In fact, if the sun were to blow up right this minute, God forbid, chas v'shalom, we would not notice this until it would take a minute before we'd realize it. And the farther we get away from the Earth's gravity, the time changes. Like the stars that we see in the sky every night. Those stars that we see, the light that we see, is actually 50 years old. And this is something from science that says if a star were to explode, it would take 50 years before we'd actually see it. It seemed like we'd see it right away, but it actually blew up 50 years beforehand because the light takes 50 years to get to us. So the idea of gravity change means that time is different, and that the less gravity, and I'm not a scientist, I'm only giving you a generalization. If you want to look up this stuff, I'm sure you can find it. But the lack of gravity changes, reduces time, makes it go slower. 2 years ago, I was doing conservation for the Parks Department out in Arizona and southern Utah, building trails and rock work and working in the forest and the wilderness. And I took a 10-hour boat ride across the Colorado River to do a job out there in the wilderness. And I was talking to a man, and he was a biologist, I believe, and he was talking about the rocks and the formations and how old they are. And he wasn't a religious man. It is southern Utah. It's a religious area, but he was not religious. Moab, the area was called. And he said something that clicked in my head. He said, the way we looked at time back then, millions of years ago, was different because one day to us was like 6 days back then because of the gravity change. And I said, wait a minute. Well, in the Bible, gravity was not as we know it today. And I told him this concept, and he was like, well, I don't know. But it's a good point. I don't know the answer. And I thought that was a fair from a man who's not religious and is more into science than belief in one God. So it was a good conversation. Nonetheless, when we look at the Bible, there are many details that we leave out, and the idea that many of the things in the 5 books of Moses are metaphors. The idea God stretches out his hand. Well, God doesn't have a hand. It's a metaphor for us to understand. You could say, did Adam and Eve actually eat from an apple? Now, we know that it probably was not an apple. We don't know what it was. But did they really even eat from anything? It could have been a metaphor for them taking an evil and absorbing it into their lives. And, who knows? There's a story from the midrash of Genesis, Bereshit, that says that when Adam and Eve were punished, the serpent was punished, and the king of the angels, Shimon, I believe his name was punished. Now, the king of the angels was jealous of man. He said, man doesn't deserve, this freedom of will, and he doesn't deserve all these things. And he had a jealousy towards man, and he looked to get man into trouble. So he found the serpent. Now, we don't know what the serpent was. For all I know, it was a Neanderthal. Before it could have been one of those people that, today we find that all these bones that we thought were people or ancestors of people, science is now saying, no, they were subspecies or they were different species altogether. Who knows? Maybe the serpent was one of those. I don't know. And neither do we. Serpent was something that just was made up, really, and stuck. But nonetheless, he saw in the serpent, make this easy, a desire for Eve, for Chava. He wanted her. And he jumped, it says, onto the serpent's back, the king of the angels, and told him secrets and kind of took control of him. So he told him the secrets of the world and so forth. So when Eve came around, he told the serpent told Eve, you know why God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of good and evil? You know why God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of knowledge? Because he's afraid, I don't know if he said afraid, but he doesn't want you to be able to create worlds like he does. Because once you do this, you will be able to create worlds like God does. Nonetheless, she ate from the tree. Now, Adam and Eve, they had good intentions when they did this. They wanted to have a closer connection to God. They wanted to understand their father, their mother better. They didn't do it for the sake of being equal to God. That wasn't their concept. They wanted to serve God. Nonetheless, they did the sin. When God punished Adam and Eve, he punished, Eve would have problems with labor, Adam would have to toil the soil, and so forth. He punished the king of the angels with being, as we know it, the devil. Now, in Judaism, we don't really believe in the devil. We have the Satan, the Zohar, the evil incarnation, somebody who looks to punish man. And in Judaism, we don't even have a hell. We have a 12-month period that if you sin, you go into a 11 months of penance, and then you go to heaven. In fact, in Judaism, we believe everybody goes to heaven. Maybe not Hitler, Hamak Shemo, or somebody really wicked like that, but 99% of us all go to heaven according to Judaism. And if we have to, we go to this 11-month period, which he has a domain over. Anyways, when he punishes the serpent, he doesn't punish him for lying. God punishes the serpent, says, for speaking lashon hora. Now, lashon hora means speaking gossip. It's a very evil, horrible thing in Judaism. It's one of the worst things somebody could do is speak gossip, speak lashon hora. It's considered the the Chavetz Chaim, who was a great rabbi of the Masnagish Jews back in Europe. He wrote whole books about Lashon Hara and said that it destroys the world, that it destroys the community, and in many ways that's true. God punished the serpent for speaking Lashon Hara. Did he punish him for lying? Now, what do we get from this? By man knowing good and evil, by him knowing what's right and wrong, and being able to actually do what's right, and learn from that, and uplift himself, he's actually able to make himself holier and stronger. When Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, we learn that we are to better ourselves and learn Torah and treat each other with respect, that we should get to such a high level of being close to God that there will come a point after like 3,000 years, but that's another story, of that there will be no purpose for this world, because we'll be such on high level that we'll just go to God. There's stories of Kabbalic stories in the Sefer Yetzorah and other holy Kabbalic books of that rabbis turning, rocks or what have you into gold. Now, they were able to do this because of the 10 Sfirot, the 10 attributes of God. By combining them and meditating on them with the 22 letters of the Aleph Beis, they're able to change things, to make things into gold or what have you, like God in a way. So we learned that yeah, the serpent did speak Lashon Hara. Now, there are other big things. Going into archaeology, for example. 100 years ago, there were archaeologists that went to the Middle East, that went to Israel, and they had a certain timeline of how they judged how to judge something of a city, of pottery, of so forth. And everything matched up. Jericho, the city of Jericho, matched up. What happened in the Bible happened in Jericho. Mind you, Jericho was rebuilt and a city, so how they were able to do that, but they were able to figure that out. They went to Hatzor, a city in the north, and they realized Hatzor was burnt and destroyed just like in the Bible. They went to Mesopotamia and found in the city of Ur in the south of Iraq today that it had flooding. And they all said that everything lined up with the Bible. Then later on, this woman, British woman, I believe in the 20s, came and redid everything. She re-examined everything, but she came up with her own time. She took pottery and judged timelines through pottery, and she said everything's off by like 100, 200, 300 years. What happened there was true. She didn't deny that, but she said the timeline of what the Bible says and what the facts on the ground are totally different, therefore it can't be true. Now, this is absurd. Every 10 years or so, we are updated with new and inventive ideas. Like what we thought was the right thing yesterday is something totally different today. So the idea of how science, decides time can be very different in 20 years from now. And I don't think they'll dispute that. They'll argue with you, but you cannot define and say, yes, this is the fact. It's a fact for the moment. That doesn't mean it is the fact. We find that the animals that were created in the Bible match with the way science says they were created. And the idea that Adam and Eve, it says, didn't look like you and me. Adam and Eve were very hairy and very tall. Now some will say Adam was a giant, 90 feet high or something like that. There are other more practical says he was 9 feet tall, but he was very hairy, and their faces look different. We also learn from Noah and the Ark that the Teva, that before the flood, there was only one season of the world, and that season was perfect. It was a summer, perfect weather, the land, harvest and everything. And then after the flood, we came about with 4 seasons, and the land became hard to toil. Science also says that because the way the earth, once upon a time, was not on a tilt, and because of that, there was 1 season. And after the tilt, there became 4 seasons. Now, in the midrash, which was 2,000 years ago written, it also says the land during Noah tilted. Such an idea. There's also a lot of things in the midrash that indicate that the world was round. Mind you, the whole idea of the world being flat was a Christian idea. There's nowhere in the Bible that says that the world was flat. There was indications that it was round. Anyways, my time is running out, There's a lot to say on this topic, but I only get